stop slipping and stop cutting your socks. We have 15 different color options between 3 grip socks and 2 sleeve types. Something for everybody at a price that just makes sense. Available now at puregripsocks.com.
I'm sure Puma won't be happy with me saying this, but it's the truth. You should not buy their latest flagship football boots. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to the brand new Puma Ultra 6 Carbon. And we use the terminology brand new very loosely here because if you're familiar with the Ultra 5 Carbon that this football boot replaces as the next generation, if we can even call it that, the Ultra 6 changes very little. In fact, it changes so little, it's almost silly to even call this an Ultra 6. Where I get it, we live in a world where having new products is ultimately what drives sales and interest to any given brand, especially when you're talking about football boots. But like I said at the beginning of the video, this is not one that I think you should buy. And that's not because I think it's a bad product. In fact, I think it's really good, and we'll talk about why in today's video, even though there are some quirks about this football boot that maybe aren't for everybody. But the reason you shouldn't buy them is because of the existence of the Ultra 5 Carbon that came before it that was also really good, but not very popular from a sales perspective, meaning that you can get those football boots in multiple colorways for basically 50% off in and around $150, or you can go and spend $290 on the Ultra 6 Carbon and get the fancy new graphics. It's a cool looking football boot, don't get me wrong, but from a fit, feel, and performance standpoint, it is exactly the same product or very close to it with a new name. So if you clicked on this video expecting to learn about major changes, sorry to disappoint, they simply aren't here. But if you do want to learn a little bit about the subtle changes that Puma have made from Ultra 5 Carbon to Ultra 6 Carbon, we're going to go over all those details in today's video, including how they fit and feel on feet. So if you're interested in learning more, please stick around. And if you are interested in a pair of these for yourself or the deeply discounted Ultra 5 Carbons, you can pick them up on sale below their normal retail prices by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes via the links down below. Where in all honesty, at in and around $150, the Ultra 5 Carbon might just be the most unique pair of football boots that you can buy for that amount of money. And really quickly, before we keep going, if you enjoy the videos, don't forget to drop a like. And if you appreciate the unsponsored, unsugar-coated, brutally honest opinions on this channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button along with the little bell notification so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2025. To get right to the point, what are the main differences and or changes that they've made going from Ultra 5 Carbon to Ultra 6 Carbon, the next generation, if we can even call it that, where right off the bat you will notice the difference in the form stripe itself as well as some of the graphics. However, Puma is a brand that has so much variety from colorway to colorway with their different graphics and all the nuances that come along with those graphics packages, as we've talked about in the past with the Ultra 5 Ultimate and all of its different graphics packages. So if we're talking about simply physical changes that are not affected by the colorway, you're only going to find 3 minor differences between these two boots, all of which I would argue make for no significant impact on the fit, feel, or performance. The first change being one that you can't see, but according to Puma, they have actually changed up the Power Tape SQD reinforcement of the upper, which is basically what is going to give you that little bit of added structure for that locked in and responsive feel, where on this particular colorway, I'm not sure if it'll be different with less busy ones down the line. You can't really see much of a difference, where again, even if we look at this Ultra 5, you can't see much of that internal reinforcement. And from the outside, it's the same textile-based synthetic material with the Grip Control Pro on the surface, long lines that run the length of the upper that give it a little bit of a ridge texturing. And in general, it's still very soft, it's very pliable, it's still a one-piece upper with the central lacing system. And even if you look inside, all the lining materials that are going to be directly against your foot are exactly the same. However, if you have these two side by side, you could make the argument that the Ultra 6 Carbon is slightly more structured, but does that actually translate to any difference in feel or performance when the boots are on feet? I would argue absolutely not. This is the most minor of changes, where if you like the feel of the Ultra 5, you are still going to like the feel of the Ultra 6. This, again, I would personally chalk down as a meaningless change. The next change arguably being even less significant, and that is the pattern of the elasticated knit running across the top of the foot, particularly in the area at the very top of the lacing system, where you can see on the new Ultra 6, it's just perfectly rounded off with a straight edge. However, on the previous generation Ultra 5, you have this little nub that sticks out. But other than that, I really can't tell a difference between the two. The material seems to wrap your ankle exactly the same way. You can see from a construction process, they have not changed a single thing. And as far as the boots fit and feel, there have been no changes to the shaping or last, which makes a lot of sense given that the sole plate and stud pattern has also undergone no changes. Personally, I kind of like that little nub piece, but in all honesty, it really doesn't matter. With the third and final change again being a very small one, but perhaps the most meaningful, even though again, you cannot feel it on the ball, and that is this ridge texturing on a diagonal that basically just runs from here to here on the upper, basically on the part that's closest to the lacing system. It's a little bit of extra texturing, and as you can see with this very complex graphic on the surface, it's a little bit tricky to see. The light kind of has to catch it in the right way, and definitely if you run your finger along it, it does have some extra grittiness to it, just because you have slightly taller lines versus the ridge texturing that's already across the entire upper. But again, does this translate to any significant amounts of extra grip or change up the feel on the ball? In my experience, if I didn't know it was there, I would never guess that they've made a change. And not to pick on Puma, because I do like that they vary up the graphics on their football boots quite frequently, but just like I've said with the Ultra 5, the Ultra 6 is no different in that the Grip Control Pro texture on the surface of the upper, on the spots that feature no graphics, legitimately has that kind of soft silicone grippy texture that I could only equate to something along the lines of the grip knit material found on Nike's top-end Mercurials. It legitimately provides that much extra grip. But in the area with the form stripe, that is more of like a harder, thin plastic that isn't grippy. And then every spot that has a graphic on the surface ends up having a smooth, non-grippy finish, where in the case of this Dare 2 Pack colorway, you have all these neon yellow and orange graphics on the medial side of the foot, including in the area where they've added that extra grip texture that take away from the grip texture itself. So if you're ever buying a pair of Puma Ultras, whether it's a 6 or a 5, understand that the busier graphics colorways are going to have less grip because most of the grip is covered up by the graphics, versus the more simple colorways with no graphics are going to have more of a consistent grippy finish on the surface of the upper because it hasn't covered up the Grip Control Pro texture. Where beyond those three somewhat meaningless changes, the Ultra 6 Carbon is more or less a rinse and repeat, which is a bit of a shame because I think it's been disappointing at the overall response for the Ultra 5 Carbon, given that this carbon sole plate, I would argue, is the best carbon sole plate we've ever seen in football boots. However, the downfall of this product, I think, has definitely been the price at $290. Full retail. It's one of the most expensive football boots on the market, and Puma is not a brand that, given their track record in recent years, there've definitely been a dip in popularity, and I just don't think there's that many people willing to spend top dollar on Pumas, especially when you can get older colorways and older models on sale for sometimes as much as 60 or 70% off. The other thing that has really hurt Puma with this carbon concept is they've gone after the responsive angle rather than the lightweight one, where I think when you actually feel these boots on feet and feel how stiff this sole plate is, it's very obvious that you're going to get tons and tons of energy return. Whether or not that actually translates into you being faster or saving energy way or really improving performance in any way, I think is more of a perception thing rather than a reality. But there's no denying that in terms of giving you that underfoot energy return, we've probably never had anything quite like this. The only thing that comes close would be the F50's double sole plate design on the $300 F50 Plus, but that's a laceless football boot with this large stack height and elevated forefoot. That definitely isn't for everybody either. But if you like that kind of close to the ground, super stiff, definitely sprinter spike type of feel, there really hasn't been anything quite like this carbon sole plate from Puma, where whether it's the Ultra 5 or the Ultra 6 carbon, it's just really, really impressive. But it's not light, which is particularly a problem when you're talking about a pair of speed boots, and something that I think Puma has really struggled to convince the public on, where you want performance rather than weight savings, when they've always pushed weight savings in pretty much all the marketing for every speed boot of all time. If we use Nike as an example, back when they had their Elite series and obviously the carbon fiber sole plate on the Mercurial Superfly, yes, the responsiveness was part of the marketing, but it was more so about carbon fiber just being the lightest thing possible, because that is how people perceive carbon fiber as a material as it relates to just about anything. But I guess just for the sake of comparison, here's an Ultra 6 carbon, here's an Ultra 5 carbon. Let's see if there's any difference, both in the same size, 9.5 US. We'll start off with the old version. They weigh in at 7.6 ounces, the equivalent of 216 grams. Again, not heavy, but one of the heaviest speed boots currently on the market. Now we'll throw on the new Ultra 6 carbon, and you can see that they somehow weigh in at 7.45 ounces, the equivalent of 211 grams. So whether it's because of the changes that they've made, or maybe just some minor tolerance differences as it relates to manufacturing, technically the new one, at least with this right boot versus this right boot, is 5 grams lighter, but still over that 200 gram mark, which for $300 is just not light enough. And not to pick on Puma too much, but just as an example, if we look at the weight of the Nike Phantom 6 Elite Low, a control boot rather than a speed boot, in the same size, 9.5 US, you can see that they weigh in at 6.8 ounces, the equivalent of 194 grams, which is quite a bit lighter than their top-end flagship speed boot with a carbon fiber sole plate that costs more than these. Are you getting why this is a bit of a tough sell? If I was blindfolded and somebody put these on my feet and asked me to guess which boots they were, I am confident that I would 100% be able to guess that it was a carbon version of a Puma Ultra, but I guarantee that I would also guess that it was the Ultra 5 carbon, because that's exactly what these feel like, despite it being the Ultra 6. Like I've talked about throughout this entire video, the changes that they've made are so minor that the end result is basically the exact same football boot. The only way that you would be able to tell that this is an Ultra 6 is the new graphics, which by the way are actually mismatched on the right and left boot, with that inside graphic in the neon yellow, which is actually a cool little detail. Again, I really appreciate what Puma does with the variety of graphics, but as far as fit and feel is concerned, this is exactly like the Ultra 5 Carbon, which was already a bit of an acquired taste, part of the reason why I think they haven't been as popular as Puma initially hoped they would be. Where the performance characteristics are undeniable. The sole plate underfoot is incredibly responsive, and the traction provided by this FG stud pattern is as aggressive as anything. The upper wraps your foot very closely and in general has that very secure, locked-in sensation, with the touch on the ball being very thin, providing that barefoot sensation, and the Grip Control Pro, more so in the areas without all the busy graphics, providing that extra grip on the ball, giving it a little bit more of that controlled feel. However, the carbon model is just very stiff and very hard underfoot, which you might find uncomfortable depending on personal preference. For me personally, I can tell you that I much prefer the feel of the plastic sole plate on the much cheaper Ultra 5 Ultimate, or I guess in this case, the Ultra 6 Ultimate, the new version of the Ultra 5, which is also hardly different from the old one. Where it's not only the stiffness underfoot that I think makes the carbon version more uncomfortable than the plastic plated model, but also the heel liner is a little bit different on the carbon, and because of that added stiffness in the sole plate, I just find that my heel is able to move around a little bit more, and in general it just ends up feeling harder against the back of your heel than what the plastic plated variation has. Not to the detriment of the overall comfort of the football boot. It's not uncomfortable to play in the carbon plated Ultras, but again, I definitely don't think they are the most comfortable speed boots that money can buy, but like I said, they definitely feel unique. If you like that stiff underfoot sprinter spike sensation, I don't think there's ever been a design quite as aggressive as these are in terms of what you can actually feel. They very much feel like they were designed to allow you to run as fast as possible. Whether or not they will actually make you faster, however, is a matter of personal opinion. I am of the opinion that they won't make you faster, but of course, your mileage may vary when it comes to that type of thing. As far as fit and sizing is concerned, again, no changes here whatsoever. The boots as a whole wrap your foot very closely with the laces tied tight, but at the same time aren't lacking in width or volume. I think the Puma Ultras, whether it's the 5 or the 6, have some of the best shaping in the speed boot category right now, where if you like that snug, secure fit, they provide that, but at the same time offer a really nice level of comfort without that kind of squeeze your foot uncomfortably sensation. And as far as sizing is concerned, I'm wearing these in my usual size 9.5 US, where the Ultras as a whole, again, whether it's Ultra 5 or Ultra 6, Ultimate or Carbon, they run a smidge long, maybe a quarter size, maybe a little bit less than that. It's not enough for me to be able to go down half a size. I'm kind of a little bit, I would argue, in between sizes when it comes to this particular football boot, where if you have Ultra 5s and are thinking about getting Ultra 6, the sizing is the same. But if you're coming from other football boots, if your boots currently fit extremely tight, true to size on the Ultras is definitely the way to go. Whereas if you find that you already have a little bit of extra room, going down half a size because of these running just that smidge long might not be a bad idea. Something that I think does feel a little bit exaggerated on the Carbon model in particular because of how stiff that sole plate is. It has a little bit of like an upward curvature at the toe and forefoot area, where when you have that little bit of extra length like I do, it just makes the boots feel a little bit less connected to your feet, which again is just one of those elements of the carbon plated model that I've never been a huge fan of. They don't feel bad, they just feel different, and it's a type of different that just isn't necessarily my cup of tea. Where in conclusion, my opinion of the Ultra 5 Carbon pretty much carries over to the Ultra 6. This carbon plate is incredibly impressive in terms of what it is as a technical achievement, but because of how different it is from a traditional football boot sole plate, it becomes a bit of an acquired taste, where unless you really like the feel of something very stiff and hard underfoot, this is not necessarily going to be the most comfortable football boot for everybody, hence the popularity, especially amongst Puma's own pro-endorsed athletes, of the plastic plated Ultra versus the carbon plated one. To make a long story short, especially given how often Puma changes up the graphics, this very well could have just been the Ultra 5, or dare I say an Ultra 5.1, but as the Ultra 6, it sees no real improvement over the previous model, and like I said, at anywhere near the full $290 retail price, at this point in time, simply is not worth it. You can almost get 2 pairs of Ultra 5 Carbons for the price of these, and they're basically the exact same football boot.